Hey everyone, before we dive into tonight's story, if you're enjoying the content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you possibly know and makes a real difference in keeping these stories coming to you. Also, drop a comment letting us know what time it is for you, and where in the world you're listening from, but only if you want to. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. It creates this amazing global community of truth seekers and curious minds. Now, let's get into tonight's investigation. There are places on Earth where the official story feels too clean, too rehearsed, like someone scrubbed the details until only the safe parts remained. Mount Shasta is one of those places. Rising over 14,000 feet above Northern California, it dominates the landscape like a frozen sentinel, beautiful and enigmatic. For over a century, stories have circulated about what lies beneath this mountain. Stories of underground cities, stories of ancient civilizations, stories that get dismissed as folklore, new age fantasy, or the rambling of imaginative hikers who spent too long in thin air. But what if the dismissal is the cover-up? What if something beneath Mount Shasta forced the United States government to seal tunnels, confiscate research, and silence witnesses for nearly 90 years? This is the story of Harold Finnerty, a man who took his secrets to the grave. This is the story of his granddaughter Lila, who refused to let those secrets stay buried. And this is the story of what they found in the mountain. Something that challenges everything we think we know about human history. March 1979. The Deathbed Note. Harold Finnerty died on a grey morning in Ashland, Oregon. Heart failure, the doctor said. Quick and relatively painless for a man in his late 70s. He had lived a quiet life after retiring from the United States Geological Survey, tending a small garden, reading military history and keeping mostly to himself. His neighbours described him as polite but distant, the kind of man who never quite seemed at ease, even in his own home. His granddaughter Lila arrived 3 days after his death to help sort through his belongings. She had always been close to Harold, closer than most grandchildren manage with their grandparents. He had encouraged her curiosity, her questions, her refusal to accept simple answers to complex problems. As a child, she had asked him why the sky was blue, and instead of giving her the standard explanation, he had taught her about wavelengths and atmospheric scattering. That was Harold. He never dumbed things down. The house smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Leela moved through the room slowly, feeling the weight of absence in every corner. Harold's desk sat near the window, covered in papers and notebooks. She began sorting them into piles: financial documents, personal letters, old survey maps from his USGS days. It was methodical work, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind processes grief. Then she found the envelope. It was tucked inside a locked drawer in the bottom of his desk, beneath a false bottom she only discovered because the drawer seemed too shallow compared to the others. The envelope was thick, made of heavy paper that had yellowed with age. Across the front, in Harold's precise handwriting, were words that made her stop breathing for just a moment. Mount Shasta. Do not open classified. Lila sat back in the chair, holding the envelope up to the light. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Harold had worked on dozens of geological surveys during his career. She'd seen his maps before, his field notes, his careful documentation of rock formations and water tables, but she'd never seen anything marked classified. The USGS did not deal in classified material. They mapped the Earth's surface. They studied earthquakes and volcanoes. They published their findings for other scientists to review. So why would her grandfather have a sealed envelope marked with government classification warnings? She broke the seal. Inside were 3 items. The first was a hand-drawn topographic map of Mount Shasta, rendered with the kind of precision that came from decades of professional cartography. The mountain's familiar silhouette was marked with contour lines, drainage patterns, and geological features. But there was something else. On the eastern side of the mountain, below the tree line, a location was marked with a red X and labelled in small, urgent letters, Addit 7, closed 1934. The second item was a series of photographs, black and white, badly faded. They showed the interior of what looked like a tunnel or cave. The walls appeared smooth, too smooth for natural rock formations. In one photograph, a hand was pressed against the wall for scale. The texture looked almost metallic, reflective in the harsh light of the camera flash. The third item was a handwritten note on a torn piece of paper. The mountain is hollow in the wrong places. They found something in 1934. We sealed it, but it wakes. Lila read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Harold's handwriting, no question. But the words felt wrong, almost panicked. Harold had been a scientist, rational to his core. He did not write about mountains waking or hollow spaces in wrong places. He wrote about basalt layers and glacial movements and tectonic activity. She was still holding the note when she heard the vehicles pull up outside. 2 black SUVs parked in front of Harold's house. 4 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that suggested military or federal training. Lila watched from the window as they approached the front door. No badges visible, no agency identification. Just 4 men who knocked once, firmly, and then waited. She opened the door. "Miss Finnerty?" The man hissed. Front was tall, late 40s, with a face that gave away nothing. "We're here to collect materials related to your grandfather's work with the United States Geological Survey. It's standard procedure when a former employee with security clearance passes away." "Security clearance?" Lila kept her voice steady. "My grandfather was a cartographer. He mapped mountains." Nevertheless, the man's expression did not change. "We need to collect his notebooks, maps, and any documents related to his survey work. It will only take a few minutes." They were inside before she could protest. They moved through Harold's house like they had done this before, opening drawers, checking shelves, moving with practiced efficiency. They took his notebooks. They took his old survey equipment. They took boxes of papers from the garage that Lila had not even opened yet. The tall man noticed her watching. "This is routine, Miss Finnerty. Nothing to be concerned about." "Then why do you need his old maps?" "Government property. Technically, any work he did while employed by the USGS belongs to the federal government. We're just reclaiming what's ours." They were gone in less than 20 minutes. Lila stood in the now ransacked house, feeling like she had just been robbed by her own government. But they had not found the envelope. It was still in her jacket pocket, pressed against her chest like a secret heartbeat. That night she spread the map and photographs across her kitchen table and began to research. If someone wanted Harold's materials badly enough to confiscate them within days of his death, then those materials contained something worth hiding. She was going to find out what. The real history, they tell us, Mount Shasta has always been a mountain wrapped in mystery. For the indigenous Karuk, Shasta and Modoc peoples, it was a sacred place, home to the Great Spirit. White settlers arriving in the mid-1800s found themselves equally drawn to the mountain's imposing presence, and soon stories began circulating about what might lie beneath its snow-covered slopes. The Lemurian legend emerged in the late 1880s. According to the story, survivors of a lost continent called Lemuria, similar to Atlantis, had fled to Mount Shasta and established an underground city called Telos. These tall, white-robed figures would occasionally emerge to purchase supplies in nearby towns, paying with gold nuggets of unusual purity. In August of 1884, the San Francisco Chronicle published an account from a prospector named J.C. Brown, who claimed to have discovered an underground city carved into the mountain, complete with gold shields, hieroglyphs, and mummified remains of beings over 8 feet tall. The story captivated readers, though Brown mysteriously vanished before he could lead an expedition back to the site. By 1904, the legend had solidified with the publication of A Dweller on Two Planets, written by Frederick Spencer Oliver. The book described advanced beings living beneath Shasta, possessing technology far beyond human capability. It became a foundational text for the New Age movement and cemented Mount Shasta's reputation as a centre of mystical activity. But here is what the legends do not tell you. Here is the part that gets buried beneath the folklore and the New Age tourism. The United States Geological Survey began heavily mapping Mount Shasta in 1925. Teams of surveyors spent months in the field, documenting every ridge, every canyon, every geological formation. They returned in 1932 for more detailed work, and then again in 1934. Something happened during that 1934 survey. The official records are sparse, almost deliberately vague. A USGS team led by a geologist named Thomas Eldridge was conducting cave surveys on the eastern face of the mountain when they disappeared for 48 hours. When they finally emerged, their report mentioned disorientation and strange acoustics inside the cavern system. They noted that sounds echoed in ways that seemed impossible given the cave's dimensions, and they experienced unusual equipment malfunctions that they could not explain. The report was filed and then seemingly forgotten, except the surveying tunnels, designated Adit 1 through Adit 9, were all quietly sealed within months. The official reason given was structural instability and risk of collapse. No further surveys were conducted in that region for over 20 years. Then there was the aerial incident of 1945. During post-war mapping missions, United States Army Air Force pilots were conducting photographic surveys of the West Coast. One pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, documented an unusual observation in his flight log. While circling the south face of Mount Shasta, he noted what appeared to be an opening in the rock face that reflected light in a metallic manner. He circled back for a second pass and took additional photographs. The photographs exist. They are part of the official military archive. But the official explanation given was ice reflection, a play of light on glacial formations. The opening Lieutenant Webb documented does not appear on any current geological survey. When Lila Finnerty began researching these incidents, she was not looking for proof of underground cities or lost civilizations. She was looking for an explanation of why her grandfather would have a sealed envelope marked classified, and why federal agents would confiscate his materials within days of his death. What she found instead was a pattern of official interest, official secrecy, and official dismissal that stretched back almost 50 years. Harold Finnerty's shadow surveys. Lila spent 3 weeks in libraries and archives, chasing down references to her grandfather's work. His official employment record with the USGS showed steady, unremarkable service from 1948 through 1976. He had worked on surveys in California, Oregon, and Washington. He had published papers on volcanic geology and tectonic mapping. Everything was normal, documented, and publicly accessible, until she found the gaps. Between 1956 and 1959, Harold's official work record showed him assigned to routine topographic surveys in the Cascade Range. But when Lila requested the specific survey reports from that period, she was told that those documents were not available for public review. When she asked why, she was informed that they had been reclassified by the Department of Defense as part of Cold War security protocols. Why would basic geological surveys be classified for national security reasons? She started searching for anything Harold might have left behind that the federal agents had missed. She checked his house again, more carefully this time, looking for hiding places she might have overlooked. She found them in the garage, tucked inside the hollow leg of an old workbench. More notebooks. These were different from his official USGS field books. The pages were water-stained, the handwriting hurried, almost frantic in places. They were dated between 1956 and 1959, the exact years of the classified surveys. Lila spread them across her table and began reading. The surveys had been ordered by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, not the USGS. Harold had been temporarily assigned to a joint military-civilian team conducting what was officially described as seismic monitoring research. The Cold War was at its height. and the government was deeply concerned about detecting Soviet nuclear tests. Seismic stations were being established throughout the western United States to create an early warning network. But Harold's notes describe something else entirely. Subterranean resonance patterns inconsistent with known cave systems, he wrote on one page. Echoes suggest regular geometric spacing beneath primary cavern. On another page, thermal void pockets at depths that should not support such temperatures, heat source unknown. And then, circled in red ink, not natural. Lila felt something shift in her understanding. Her grandfather had not been mapping the surface of Mount Shasta. He had been mapping what was beneath it, and he had found something that should not exist. She kept reading. References to cyclopean geometry, a term usually reserved for massive ancient stonework like the walls of Mycenae or the temples of Malta. References to metallic signatures in soil samples. References to electromagnetic anomalies that interfered with surveying equipment. One entry from July 1958 was particularly striking. Descended into a DEET 7 with the team. The tunnel extends far beyond the 1934 seal. We broke through yesterday. The corridor beyond is not natural. The walls are too smooth. The angles are too precise. There is a smell like ozone and hot metal. The temperature rises as you descend. At the third junction, we found markings. Not native, not English, not any language we recognise. Lila stopped reading and sat back, her mind racing. Addit 7. The same designation marked on the map Harold had sealed in the envelope. There was more. Clipped to the back of one notebook was a photograph, black and white, badly faded. It showed 3 men standing in front of what looked like a tunnel entrance. The men wore field gear from the 1950s. Behind them, barely visible in the dim light, was a wall that looked too smooth to be natural rock. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 3 names: Harold Finnerty, James Pollock, Thomas Eldridge. Thomas Eldridge, the same name from the 1934 USGS team that disappeared for 48 hours. Lila grabbed her laptop and started searching. Thomas Eldridge had led the 1934 survey. According to newspaper archives, he had gone missing 3 months after returning from Mount Shasta. His body was never found. The official report called it a hiking accident, though no evidence of such an accident was ever documented. All of his maps and field notes had been seized by the Department of the Interior in October 1934. 24 years later, Harold Finnerty was working with a team that included Thomas Eldridge's name on the back of a photograph. Either the man had not died in 1934, or Harold had been studying Eldridge's original work. There was one more item in the notebooks that made Lila's hands tremble as she held it. A letter Harold had written, but apparently never sent, dated June 1952. The tunnels extend far beneath the volcanic shelf. Eldridge was right. The structure is artificial. The metal is older than the strata. I do not know what we have found, but I know it should not be here. I know that every instinct in me says we should seal this and walk away. But they will not stop. They need to know what it is, and I fear what will happen when they find out. Project Shasta 2, the Cold War connection. It took Lila another month to find the binder. She discovered it in a storage unit Harold had rented under a false name, a detail she only uncovered because he had kept the key taped under the drawer of an old filing cabinet. The storage unit was in Reading, nearly 2 hours south of where Harold had lived. Inside were boxes of materials that the federal agents had missed, things Harold had clearly hidden away deliberately. The binder was labelled Shasta 2, Cold War Seismic Anomaly Study, 1957. This was not folklore. This was not conspiracy theory. This was a real government document stamped with Department of Defense insignia, complete with project codes and authorization signatures. During the 1950s, the United States government genuinely did conduct extensive seismic and geological studies on West Coast volcanoes. The official purpose was monitoring for nuclear tests, creating a network of sensors that could detect underground explosions anywhere on the planet. Mount Shasta, as one of the tallest and most geologically active peaks in the Cascades, was a natural choice for such monitoring. But the Shasta binder contained information that went far beyond seismic monitoring. The first section documented equipment malfunctions in the Shasta region, magnetometers going haywire, seismographs recording vibrations that did not match any known geological activity, radio interference so severe that teams had to communicate using written notes because their walkie-talkies produced only static. The second section was titled Structural Analysis. Here, the language became more technical and more disturbing. Engineers described finding echo patterns that suggested large hollow spaces deep beneath the mountain, spaces that did not match known cave systems. The geometry was wrong. Natural caves form along fracture lines and water channels, creating irregular organic patterns. The spaces beneath Shasta formed regular geometric shapes. One page was marked with a red stamp, structural echoes unlike caves. Another page, metallic signature below basalt layers, and then, circled in black ink, do not breach. Layer 5, Layer 5. Lila flipped through the binder, looking for any reference to what Layer 5 might be. She found it near the back, in a section marked Recommendations. The language was bureaucratic, carefully neutral, but the message was clear. Further excavation beyond Layer 4 is not recommended. Preliminary analysis suggests that Layer 5 contains the primary anomaly source. Equipment failures increase significantly at depths below 1200 meters. Structural integrity of surrounding rock questionable. Team safety cannot be guaranteed. Translation: they found something deep in the mountain, and they were afraid to dig any deeper. The final item in the binder made Lila question everything she thought she understood about her government's relationship with the truth. It was a transcript, dated March 1971. The header read, Remote Viewing Session, Subject, Anomalous Geological Formation. Location, Northern California. Remote viewing. The CIA program that trained psychics to spy on Soviet installations by projecting their consciousness across space. Lila knew about Project Stargate. It had been declassified in the mid-1990s, revealed to the public as one of the strange artifacts of Cold War paranoia. The program officially began in 1972, but this transcript was dated 1971, a year before Stargate supposedly started. The transcript was formatted like an interview. Handler: please describe what you perceive at the target location. Viewer: 12. I see stone. No, not stone. Metal. It looks like metal but old. Very old. Covered in stone. Handler: can you describe the shape? Viewer: 12. A chamber. Big. The walls curve up like a dome. There are patterns on the metal. Symbols maybe. I cannot read them. Handler: where is this chamber located? Viewer: 12. Under snow. A tall mountain. North of Reading. Very deep. It is cold there, but the chamber is warm. There is something in the centre. It glows faintly. Handler: what is in the centre? Viewer: 12. I do not want to look at it. It feels wrong, like it is watching me even though I am not really there. Handler: please continue. Viewer: 12. A sphere, silver or grey. It sits on a pedestal. The pedestal is not human. The proportions are wrong. Everything about this place feels wrong. Whoever built this was not human. Handler: you're safe. The target cannot harm you. Continue. Viewer: 12. There are handprints on the wall near the entrance, pressed into the metal when it was soft. 5 fingers on the left hand, 6 fingers on the right. They are not human hands. The transcript ended there, stamped with a code. Session terminated. Viewer distress. Lila sat in the storage unit for a long time, holding the transcript in her hands. This was not legend. This was not folklore passed down through generations of New Age believers. This was a classified government document describing something beneath Mount Shasta that should not exist. Her grandfather had been part of the team that found it, and now she needed to find it herself. Finding Adit 7. Lila spent 2 months preparing. She was not a mountaineer, not a splunker, not trained for underground exploration. But she was Harold Finnerty's granddaughter, and she inherited his stubbornness along with his curiosity. She bought equipment, she studied maps, she read everything she could find about the eastern face of Mount Shasta, the McCloud region, the Mud Creek drainage area, and Dilla Canyon. Adit 7 had been sealed in 1934. According to mining records, it was one of 9 exploratory tunnels dug during a brief period when prospectors believed there might be valuable mineral deposits in the volcanic rock. The tunnels had been abandoned when no significant ore was found, and most had collapsed or been deliberately sealed due to safety concerns. But Harold's map showed that Adit 7 went deeper than the official records indicated. Much deeper. Lila drove to Mount Shasta in late October, when the tourist season had ended and the backcountry roads were mostly empty. She parked her truck near the old McCloud logging road and hiked in, carrying 60 pounds of gear on her back. The entrance to Adit 7 was supposed to be at roughly 8,000 feet elevation, hidden in a fold of rock near the tree line. It took her 3 days of searching to find it. The entrance had been buried under a rock slide, probably deliberately. Someone had piled stones across the opening and planted brush to hide it from casual hikers, but erosion had created a small gap at the top, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they were determined enough. Lila was determined enough. She wriggled through the gap, her headlamp cutting a narrow beam into the darkness beyond. The air inside was cold and dry, smelling of dust and stone. The tunnel stretched ahead, carved through volcanic rock, the walls rough and irregular. This was consistent with the mining tunnels from the 1930s, hand-drilled and blasted by men looking for gold or silver. She followed the tunnel down, descending into the mountain. After 50 yards, the character of the tunnel changed. The walls became smoother, the angles more precise, the temperature rose slightly enough to notice. After 100 yards, she found the seal. It was a concrete wall, thick and professionally installed, completely blocking the tunnel. Stamped into the concrete was a date, November 1934. This was the official seal, the one placed after Thomas Eldridge's team reported their disorientation and strange experiences. But Harold's notes had said they broke through the seal in 1958. She examined the concrete wall carefully, running her hands over the surface, and then she found it. A crack, barely visible, running from floor to ceiling along the left side. Someone had cut through the concrete and then carefully sealed it again. The newer concrete was slightly different in colour, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Lila pulled out her tools and began chipping away at the newer section. The concrete was old enough to crumble easily under the impact of a hammer and chisel. It took her 2 hours, but she finally broke through. The tunnel beyond was different. The walls were smooth, almost polished. The rock looked melted rather than carved, like something impossibly hot had bored through the volcanic stone. The floor sloped downward at a steady angle, descending deeper into the mountain. Her headlamp beam reflected strangely off the walls, creating odd patterns of light and shadow. She walked for what felt like an hour, though her watch said only 20 minutes had passed. Time felt wrong down here. Sounds felt wrong too. Her footsteps echoed in ways that made no sense, sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible, as if the tunnel itself was changing its acoustic properties. The temperature continued to rise. By the time she reached the junction, it was uncomfortably warm, like being in a greenhouse on a summer day. She checked her thermometer. 85 degrees. That made no sense. She was deep inside a mountain that had snow on its peaks. It should be near freezing, not warm enough to make her sweat. The junction split into 3 passages. The centre passage was marked with a cairn of stones deliberately placed. Someone before her had marked the way. Harold? Thomas Eldridge? She did not know. She followed the centre passage. The walls here were not stone. They were metal. Smooth grey metal that looked old beyond measure, tarnished but not rusted. She reached out to touch it, and the surface was warm, almost body temperature. Patterns were etched into the metal, repeating geometric designs that looked almost like writing but followed no linguistic structure she recognised. This was what Harold had meant. This was what should not be here. Metal walls inside a volcanic mountain, warm to the touch, covered in symbols that predated any known language. She kept walking, and the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The chamber beneath the mountain. The chamber was enormous. Lila's headlamp beam could not reach the far wall. The ceiling curved upward into a dome, just like Viewer 12 had described in the remote viewing transcript. The floor was made of the same grey metal, smooth and slightly warm beneath her boots. She pulled out a flashlight, a heavy-duty spotlight she had bought specifically for this expedition, and switched it on. The beam swept across the chamber, revealing its true size. It was easily 200 feet across, maybe more. The metal floor was inscribed with concentric circles, radiating outward from a central pedestal. Lila walked toward the centre, her footsteps echoing strangely in the vast space. The acoustics were wrong, just like the USGS report from 1934 had noted. Some sounds echoed loudly, bouncing off the curved walls. Other sounds were absorbed, deadened, as if the chamber itself was selectively filtering noise. Near the wall she found what the remote viewer had described. Handprints pressed into the metal, fossilised in whatever substance had been soft enough to take an impression before it hardened. The left hand had 5 fingers, the right hand had 6. The proportions were close to human, but not quite right. The fingers were longer, the palm narrower. Whoever had built this place was not human. Or if they were human in a way that predated everything anthropologists thought they knew about human evolution. The pedestal in the centre of the chamber rose about 4 feet from the floor. It was made of the same metal as everything else, but the surface was covered in more intricate patterns, symbols layered upon symbols in a way that suggested deep meaning if only you could read the language. On top of the pedestal sat a sphere. It was roughly the size of a basketball, perfectly smooth, made of metal that looked silver in her flashlight beam. The surface was covered in tiny inscriptions, spiralling around the sphere in lines so fine they were almost invisible. As Lila approached, she felt something shift in the air around her. A vibration, barely perceptible, like standing next to high-voltage power lines. This was the artifact Harold had sketched in his notebooks. This was what the government had sealed behind concrete and bureaucratic silence for nearly 50 years. Near the base of the pedestal, someone had left a metal plaque. The plaque was newer than the chamber, maybe from the 1950s based on the style of the lettering. It read, "Eldridge found the heart. We were never meant to open it." Lila stood there for a long time staring at the sphere. Every instinct told her not to touch it. The warnings in Harold's notes, the government's desperate attempts to seal this place, the plaque left by someone who clearly feared what they had discovered, all of it screamed danger. But she had come this far. She had broken through the seals. She had descended into the mountain. She needed to understand what this thing was. She reached out and touched the sphere. For a moment nothing happened. The metal was warm, warmer than the air around it, and the surface felt slightly rough, like fine sandpaper. Then the inscriptions began to glow. Faint blue light traced the spiral patterns, spreading from where her hand made contact outward, across the entire surface of the sphere. The vibration in the air intensified. Lila pulled her hand back, but the glow continued, growing brighter. The chamber itself seemed to respond, the walls humming with a low frequency that she felt in her chest more than heard with her ears. She checked her thermal reader. The temperature had spiked. The sphere was now registering at over 200 degrees, though it had not felt that hot when she touched it. The floor beneath the pedestal was glowing faintly, lines of light spreading outward along the concentric circles. Something beneath the chamber was waking up. Lila backed away from the pedestal, her heart hammering. This was not an artifact. This was not a relic of a dead civilization. This was a machine, still functional, still powered by something that had survived for thousands of years or longer. She needed to leave. Now. She ran back toward the tunnel entrance, the chamber's glow brightening behind her. The hum became a rhythmic pulse, mechanical and deliberate. Whatever she had activated was not shutting down. If anything, it was building towards something, a cycle that had been interrupted decades ago and was now resuming. Harold's final message. Lila made it back to her truck just as the sun was setting. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. She drove back to town, checked into a motel and collapsed on the bed, exhausted and terrified. That night she could not sleep. She kept hearing the hum from the chamber, that mechanical pulse that felt older than humanity itself. She kept seeing the glow spreading across the sphere, the light tracing patterns that might have been writing, or might have been something else entirely, some form of communication that humans were never meant to understand. She needed to know what Harold had thought about all this. She needed to hear his voice, his reasoning, his conclusions. She went back to the boxes of materials she'd taken from his storage unit and searched through everything one more time. She found the tape recorder buried at the bottom of a box of old survey equipment. It was an old reel-to-reel model from the 1970s, the kind Harold would have used for field notes. A single tape was still loaded on the reels. She pressed play. Harold's voice filled the room, older than she remembered, tired but clear. This is Harold Finnerty, recording on March 8th, 1979. If you are listening to this, it means I am dead, and it means you found what I have hidden. Good. Someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand what we found beneath Mount Shasta. In 1958, our team broke through the seal that Eldridge's team had placed in 1934. We descended into the mountain, following tunnels that should not exist, tunnels that were not created by natural geological processes or by human mining equipment. The tunnels led us to a chamber. Inside that chamber we found evidence of a civilization that predates anything in the archaeological record. The metal is older than the rock surrounding it. Carbon dating puts the surrounding basalt at roughly 300,000 years old. The metal cannot be dated using conventional methods, but analysis of the oxidation pattern suggests it is far, far older. Millions of years, perhaps. We found a machine. Not ruins, not artifacts. An active, functional machine built by intelligences we cannot comprehend. When we activated it, we triggered something. Seismographs across Northern California recorded vibrations that did not match any known seismic activity. The vibrations came from beneath Mount Shasta, rhythmic and mechanical, like something vast was coming back to life after sleeping for eons. We sealed it again. We had to. The government ordered us to bury everything we found, to seal the chamber, and never speak of it. They were afraid, not of what the public would think, but of what the machine might do if we continued to interfere with it. But here is what they did not understand. Here is what I did not understand until years later. The machine does not need us to activate it. It wakes on its own. Every few decades, seismographs pick up those same vibrations. They are always attributed to minor earthquakes, tectonic adjustments, volcanic activity. But I know better. The machine beneath Mount Shasta is not from a lost human civilization. It is older, it is alien, and it is waiting. I do not know what it is waiting for. I do not know what it will do when it fully awakens. I only know that we were never meant to find it, and we were certainly never meant to activate it. If you have listened to this tape, if you have found my notes and my maps, please understand the weight of what I am telling you. The truth is not what you think. The mountain is not what you think. And we are not alone in our history. The tape ended with a click, and the room fell silent. Lila sat there for a long time, processing what she had heard. Harold had known. He had known for over 20 years that something was beneath the mountain, something that challenged everything humanity believed about its place in the universe and its timeline on Earth. And now she had activated it again. The cover-up arrives. Lila checked out of the motel the next morning and started driving south. She planned to go to Sacramento, maybe find a journalist or a researcher who would take her evidence seriously. She had photographs. She had Harold's notes. She had the tape recording. Someone needed to know what was beneath Mount Shasta. She made it 20 miles before she noticed the black SUVs. There were 3 of them, travelling in formation, keeping a steady distance behind her. When she sped up, they sped up. When she slowed down, they matched her pace. They were not even trying to hide their presence. Lila pulled off the highway at a rest stop. The SUVs pulled in behind her. 6 men emerged, wearing the same dark suits and expressionless faces she'd seen at Harold's house. The man in front was tall, late 40s, with cold eyes that suggested he had done this many times before. He walked up to her truck window. "Miss Finnerty, we need you to come with us." "Who are you?" "That is not relevant. What is relevant is that you entered a restricted area yesterday. You accessed classified materials. You activated equipment that poses a significant security risk." "I do not know what you're talking about." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You saw the interior. That means you know too much. We can do this easily, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Lila looked at the 6 men surrounding her truck. She looked at the empty rest stop, no other vehicles in sight. She looked at the man's cold eyes and understood that she was not going to talk her way out of this. She needed to run. She started the truck, gunned the engine, and drove straight at the man in front of her. He dove aside and she swerved around the SUVs, accelerating back onto the highway. Behind her, the SUVs scrambled to follow. She drove fast, faster than she'd ever driven, weaving through traffic, taking exits at random, trying to lose them in the maze of back roads. But they stayed with her, coordinated and relentless. These were professionals. They had resources she could not match. She remembered the side tunnels. When she had explored Adit 7, she had seen other passages branching off from the main corridor. Some led deeper into the mountain. Some led back toward the surface. If she could get back to the mountain, she could lose them in the tunnels. She turned north, heading back toward Mount Shasta. The SUVs followed. She drove up the old logging road, her truck bouncing over ruts and rocks, pushing the vehicle far beyond what it was designed for. She reached the area near Adit 7 just as the sun was setting. She abandoned the truck and ran into the forest, carrying only a small backpack, with her flashlight and Harold's most important notes. Behind her she heard doors slamming, men shouting, engines revving. They were coming. She made it to the rock slide covering Adit 7 and squeezed through the gap. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she ran down the tunnel, descending into the mountain. She heard voices behind her, echoing strangely in the confined space. She ran past the broken seal, past the junction, into the smooth metal corridors that should not exist. The men were still following, but they were slowing down, cautious now. They knew what was down here. They knew it was dangerous. Lila found one of the side passages and ducked into it, switching off her flashlight. She crouched in the darkness, listening. Footsteps echoed past her hiding spot, moving toward the central chamber. Radio static crackled, voices speaking in clipped military jargon. She waited in the darkness for what felt like hours. Eventually the footsteps retreated. The voices faded. She was alone again, deep inside Mount Shasta, surrounded by metal walls that hummed with ancient power. She found another passage that led upward, following the natural slope of the mountain. It took her 3 hours of climbing through narrow tunnels, but eventually she emerged on the northern face of the mountain, miles from where she'd entered. Behind her she heard helicopters. She looked back and saw lights converging on the Adit 7 region. Heavy machinery was being brought in. They were sealing it again, just like they had in 1934 and again in 1958. But this time, they were not taking any chances. She heard explosions echoing across the mountain. They were collapsing the tunnels completely. The final revelation. 3 months later, Layla received a small package at a post office box she had rented under a false name. There was no return address. Inside was a fragment of metal, grey and smooth, warm to the touch even though it had been sitting in a cold mail facility. The metal was identical to the walls of the chamber beneath Mount Shasta. Wrapped around the metal was a note written in Harold's handwriting. The machine inside Shasta is not from a lost human civilization. It is older. It is waiting. Do not let them bury the truth again. But this made no sense. Harold had died before Lila ever entered the mountain. He could not have sent this package, unless he had prepared it years ago, setting up some kind of delayed delivery system, unless he had known she would go looking for answers, or unless the note was not from Harold at all. Lila spread out all her remaining evidence on her apartment floor. The photographs, the notes, the tape recording, Harold's maps, the metal fragment. She had spent 3 months in hiding, moving from town to town, afraid that the men in black SUVs would find her again. But they had not come. Maybe they thought the evidence had been destroyed. Maybe they thought she would stay silent out of fear. They were wrong. That night, the mountain rumbled. Local seismographs picked up vibrations centered directly beneath Mount Shasta. The frequency was low, rhythmic, almost mechanical. Geologists attributed it to minor tectonic adjustments. Volcanic activity settling after decades of dormancy. Nothing to be concerned about. But Lila knew better. She had heard that rhythm before, deep in the chamber, when she had touched the sphere and felt something vast wake beneath her feet. The machine was still active. The seals had not stopped it. The explosives had not buried it deeply enough. Whatever was beneath Mount Shasta, whatever Harold and Thomas Eldridge and countless others had found over the decades, it was older than human civilization. It was patient, and it was waking. No earthquake was officially reported that night, even though thousands of people across Northern California felt the tremor. The United States Geological Survey issued no statements. No warnings were given. The incident was not recorded in any official database. But Lila had felt it. She had felt the pulse of something ancient stirring beneath the mountain, counting down to a moment when it would fully awaken. And when that moment came, the government's carefully maintained silence would no longer matter. The truth beneath Mount Shasta would reveal itself, whether humanity was ready for it or not. Some mountains hold secrets in their stone. Some mountains hold mysteries in their caves. But Mount Shasta holds something else entirely. It holds evidence of intelligences that walked this earth long before we did, and it holds machines that still function after millions of years of silence. Harold Finnerty died trying to warn us. Thomas Eldridge vanished trying to understand it. Lila Finnerty risked everything to uncover it. The question is not whether the truth will come out. The question is what will happen when it does. The mountain remembers. The machine remembers. And deep beneath the snow and stone and ancient metal, something is waking. Something is waiting. Something is counting down the years until it emerges from the darkness and shows humanity just how small and young we really are in the vast timeline of this planet. Mount Shasta stands silent against the sky, beautiful and enigmatic. But if you listen carefully, if you place your hand against the stone and feel for vibrations that should not be there, you might just sense it. The rhythm, the pulse, the heartbeat of something older than human memory. And you might realize, as Harold did, as Lila did, that we were never alone on this earth. We just forgot to look beneath the mountains. What if I told you that buried beneath the frozen wastelands of Alaska lies something that could change everything we know about human history? Something that's not ancient at all, but very much alive. Tonight's story comes from a request by Matul Patel 9283. Thank you for this incredible suggestion. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoy these tales that blur the line between fact and fiction, don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more mysterious stories that will keep you wondering. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I found beneath 200 feet of Alaskan permafrost, and why the government wants me to forget it ever existed. I'm a civil engineer, nothing glamorous about it. I measure soil density, calculate load-bearing capacities, and make sure buildings don't sink into the ground. For 15 years, I've worked contracts across the country, from Florida swamplands to Nevada deserts. Alaska was supposed to be just another job. The US Army Corps of Engineers hired me in March 2023 to survey land stability for a proposed pipeline route. Nothing unusual there. Energy companies are always looking to move oil from point A to point B, and they need someone to tell them their pipes won't crack when the ground shifts. The pay was good, the timeline was reasonable, and I needed the work. The assignment took me to a stretch of wilderness about 60 miles northwest of Fairbanks. On paper, it looked simple. A 3-month survey of geological stability across a 40-mile corridor. I'd use ground-penetrating radar, seismographs and core samples to map what lay beneath the surface. Standard procedure. I should have known something was off when they gave me a satellite phone with specific instructions to check in every 12 hours. Weather can change fast up there, the project coordinator explained. We need to know you're alive. But Alaska's a dangerous place. People disappear into the wilderness all the time. It seemed reasonable. I flew into Fairbanks on a Tuesday in April, rented a heavy-duty pickup truck and loaded it with equipment. The drive to my assigned sector took 3 hours on increasingly rough roads. The last 20 miles were barely more than frozen tyre tracks cutting through endless stands of black spruce and birch. When I finally reached my starting coordinates, the silence was absolute. No wind, no animals, no aircraft overhead. Just me, my equipment, and thousands of square miles of nothing. That's when the work began, and that's when everything I thought I knew about the world started to unravel. The first week went exactly as planned. I established a base camp with a generator-powered trailer and methodically began surveying the proposed pipeline route. The ground-penetrating radar showed typical permafrost patterns, layers of ice and soil that had been frozen for millennia. My seismograph readings were clean, showing the kind of stable bedrock that pipeline engineers love to see. Core samples revealed nothing unusual, standard Arctic soil composition with good load-bearing characteristics. I was making excellent progress. Then, on day 8, something changed. I was setting up the radar array for the morning survey when I noticed interference patterns on my display. Instead of the usual chaotic scattering that indicates rock and soil, I was seeing geometric shapes. At first I assumed it was equipment malfunction. Electronic devices can act strangely in extreme cold, and I'd been pushing my gear hard. I recalibrated the radar, replaced cables, and ran diagnostic tests. Everything checked out perfectly, but the shapes remained straight lines, perfect 90-degree angles, and beneath everything a massive triangular form with sides that extended beyond my radar's maximum penetration depth of 200 feet. I switched to the seismograph, thinking maybe sound waves would give me different data. I set off small explosive charges and measured how the shock waves travelled through the ground. Standard geological surveying technique. The results made no sense. Sound waves were reflecting off something solid and geometrically perfect about 150 feet down. The reflection pattern showed clean edges, flat surfaces, and precise angles. In nature, you don't find precise angles. Rivers meander, mountains erode into curves, and rock formations crack in random patterns. This was something else entirely. I spent the rest of that day running every test I could think of. Different frequencies, multiple angles, overlapping surveys. every single measurement confirmed the same impossible truth. There was a massive pyramid buried beneath the permafrost, and it was huge. My calculations suggested sides at least 800 feet long, significantly larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The depth readings indicated it was sitting on bedrock, which meant it had been built on the surface and then buried by millions of years of geological processes. Except that made no sense either. Alaska's geological history doesn't include ancient civilizations capable of megalithic construction. The entire region was under glacial ice until relatively recently in geological terms. I sat in my trailer that night staring at the printouts and digital displays, trying to find any explanation that didn't challenge everything I understood about engineering and archaeology. Maybe it was a natural formation that just happened to look geometric. Maybe my instruments were picking up interference from buried metal or deposits. Maybe the extreme cold was affecting my equipment in ways I didn't understand. But deep down I knew I was looking at something artificial, something that had been deliberately constructed and then hidden beneath the ice. The question was, who built it, and why? I needed supplies, and more importantly, I needed to talk to someone who knew the area's history. The nearest settlement was a village called Yukon Crossing. Population 127 according to the road sign. It was a 40-minute drive south on a road that tested every shock absorber in my truck. Yukon Crossing looked like a lot of rural Alaskan towns. A handful of weathered buildings clustered around a general store and a combination post office / gas station. Most of the residents lived in trailer homes or log cabins scattered among the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin grey columns against the bright spring sky. The general store served as the unofficial community centre. Inside, I found an elderly native Alaskan man named Joseph Kaltag behind the counter, selling everything from canned goods to ammunition to fishing gear. He looked like he'd been running the place for decades. "You're the pipeline engineer," he said before I could introduce myself. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast," I replied. "Not much happens around here." He rang up my purchases: batteries, fuel canisters, and enough food to last another week. "You working up in the Forbidden Valley?" I looked up from counting cash. Forbidden Valley? Joseph's weathered face remained expressionless, but I caught something in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or warning. That's what my grandfather called it. Said the spirits there were angry, animals won't go near it, and hunters who get too close. He shrugged. "Their compasses don't work right." "Magnetic interference," I said automatically. "Probably iron ore deposits in the bedrock." Maybe. He handed me my change. Or maybe some things are better left buried. I was loading supplies into my truck when a younger native woman approached. She introduced herself as Marie Kaltag, Joseph's granddaughter, and a pilot who flew supply runs to remote camps throughout the region. "I heard you talking to Grandpa," she said, "about the valley where you're working." He mentioned compass problems. Marie glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "It's more than that. I've flown over that area maybe 50 times in the last 10 years. My instruments go crazy. GPS cuts out, radio gets static, engine RPMs fluctuate." "Electromagnetic interference," I suggested. That's what I thought too. But 3 years ago I was flying a supply run to a hunting camp about 20 miles north of your work site. Clear day, perfect visibility. I was following the river when my GPS started spinning. Compass needle was rotating like a clock hand. She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the memory. I looked down to try to navigate by landmarks, and I saw something that shouldn't have been there. Lines in the snow, geometric patterns like someone had carved designs into the landscape. They were huge, maybe a mile across and perfectly symmetrical. Could have been natural formations, wind patterns, erosion channels. Marie shook her head. "I've been flying over Alaska my whole life. I know what natural looks like. This was artificial. And when I flew back over the same area a week later, the lines were gone, covered by fresh snow." I thanked her for the information and headed back to camp, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Geometric patterns in the snow, electromagnetic interference, compasses spinning wildly. It all pointed to the same conclusion I was trying to avoid. Something beneath the permafrost was actively affecting the environment around it. That night, I reviewed my survey data again. looking for any detail I might have missed. The pyramid structure was consistent across all my measurements, but there was something else. Subtle variations in the electromagnetic readings that suggested complex internal architecture. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just a solid mass of stone. It had chambers, passages, and what looked like intricate internal mechanisms. And according to my instruments, some of those mechanisms were drawing electrical current. I woke up on day 12 to the sound of helicopter rotors. From my trailer window I could see a Black Hawk settling onto a flat area about 200 yards from my camp. No military markings, but the aircraft had the unmistakable look of government hardware. 3 men in winter camouflage climbed out as the rotors spun down. They walked directly to my trailer with the confident stride of people who expected cooperation. The leader was a tall man with close-cropped hair and reflective sunglasses. His companions looked like soldiers trying to dress like civilians, too alert, too fit, and carrying themselves like they had weapons hidden under their jackets. "Mr. Harrison," the leader said, reading my name from a tablet. "I'm Agent Collins, Department of Homeland Security. We need to discuss your recent survey findings." I stepped outside, keeping my expression neutral. I wasn't aware DHS had jurisdiction over pipeline surveys. "We have jurisdiction over potential national security threats." Collins gestured toward my equipment array. "Your seismic activity has been flagged by our monitoring systems. We need to examine your data and confiscate any materials related to subsurface anomalies." "What subsurface anomalies?" Collins removed his sunglasses, revealing pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Mr. Harrison, we know exactly what you found down there. The question is whether you're going to cooperate voluntarily or make this difficult." I had 2 choices: hand over my data willingly or watch them take it by force. Either way, they were getting what they wanted. "The hard drives are in the trailer," I said. One of Collins' men immediately headed inside while the other began disconnecting my external monitoring equipment. They worked with practiced efficiency, clearly familiar with this type of confiscation. "How long have you known it was there?" I asked. Collins was quiet for a long moment, apparently deciding how much to tell me. "The structure first appeared on our deep scanning systems in 1992. We've been monitoring it ever since." "Appeared? You mean you discovered it in 1992? "No, Mr. Harrison. I mean it appeared in 1992. Prior to that date, our scans showed normal bedrock composition. Then something changed." The man emerging from my trailer handed Collins a bag containing my hard drives and backup storage devices. They had also taken my printed survey maps and handwritten notes. 1992, I said, thinking out loud. That's when China conducted their largest underground nuclear test. Collins' expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something. Surprise, maybe, that I'd made that connection. "The Lopner test was 3,800 miles away," he said. "There's no possible connection." But his tone suggested otherwise. And I remembered something from my geological studies. Seismic waves from large underground explosions can travel through the Earth's crust and trigger responses in sensitive areas thousands of miles away. What if the Chinese nuclear test had somehow activated whatever was buried beneath the Alaskan permafrost? "You're being reassigned," Collins continued, handing me an official-looking document. "Your contract has been terminated due to unforeseeable circumstances. A helicopter will arrive tomorrow morning to transport you back to Fairbanks." "What about my equipment?" "It's been contaminated by proximity to hazardous materials. Standard decontamination procedures require disposal." That was obviously a lie. There were no hazardous materials in the area. I'd have detected them during my survey. They were confiscating everything because they didn't want me to have any physical evidence of what I'd found. "One more thing," Collins said as his team prepared to leave. "You'll be required to sign a non-disclosure agreement before returning to civilian areas. The penalty for violating that agreement is 10 years in federal prison." They climbed back into their helicopter and lifted off, leaving me alone with my suddenly empty trailer and a growing certainty that I'd stumbled into something much bigger than a pipeline survey. But I still had one advantage. They thought they'd taken all my data. They were wrong. I've always been paranoid about data backup. Too many years of watching hard drives crash and taking blame for lost survey information. So I keep a small handheld GPS unit with built-in memory storage that automatically logs all my location coordinates and instrument readings. Collins and his team had missed it because it was clipped to my belt, looked like standard hiking gear and wasn't connected to my main computer systems. That night, I reviewed the stored data on the device's tiny screen. Everything was there. Coordinates, depth readings, electromagnetic measurements, and seismic mapping data. Enough information to prove that something massive and artificial was buried beneath the permafrost. But proof wasn't enough. I needed to understand what it was and why the government was so determined to keep it secret. I made a decision that probably should have gotten me killed. I was going back to the site for one final investigation. The helicopter pickup was scheduled for 8 a.m, which gave me about 6 hours of darkness to work with. I loaded basic equipment into my backpack: the handheld GPS, the digital camera, a small electromagnetic field detector, and a battery-powered radio, and hiked back to the survey area. The night was clear and bitterly cold. My breath formed ice crystals that seemed to hang in the air, and the snow crunched under my boots with sounds like breaking glass. Above me, the aurora borealis painted green curtains across the star-filled sky. I reached the coordinates where my instruments had detected the pyramid's apex. According to my calculations, I was standing directly above the structure's highest point, about 120 feet below my boots. The handheld detector immediately started showing readings. Electromagnetic activity was significantly higher than background levels, and it seemed to be increasing. The device's small screen showed wave patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat, regular pulses of energy rising and falling in consistent cycles. I took photos of the instrument readings and recorded GPS coordinates, building a digital record that I could hopefully smuggle out of Alaska. But as I worked, something strange began happening. The aurora overhead was changing. Instead of the usual flowing curtains of light, it was forming geometric patterns, straight lines and angular shapes that mirrored the underground structure. It was as if the buried pyramid was somehow influencing the electromagnetic phenomena in the upper atmosphere. That's when I felt the vibration. It started as a barely perceptible tremor in the ground, like the feeling of a distant freight train. But it quickly intensified until I could feel it in my bones, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to synchronize with the electromagnetic readings on my detector. The device's screen was flashing warnings. Energy levels were spiking far beyond anything I'd measured during my official survey. Whatever was buried down there was waking up. I started backing away from the site, but before I could get more than 50 yards, everything electronic I carried died simultaneously. The GPS unit, the detector, my digital camera, even my LED flashlight, all dead, as if something had delivered a massive electromagnetic pulse. Above me, the aurora was blazing brighter than I'd ever seen, forming complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air itself seemed to be humming with energy, and I could feel static electricity building up on my clothing and exposed skin. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The aurora faded back to normal patterns. The ground vibration ceased. The electrical sensation disappeared. I was left standing in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness in complete darkness, holding a handful of dead electronics. I stumbled back toward camp using starlight for navigation, reaching my trailer just before dawn. When I tried to start my truck, the engine turned over immediately. Apparently whatever had killed my handheld electronics hadn't affected the vehicle's more robust electrical system. But I knew what I had experienced wasn't natural. The buried pyramid wasn't just an ancient artifact or geological formation. It was some kind of active installation that could influence electromagnetic fields across a wide area. The question was, what was its purpose? The helicopter arrived exactly at 8 a.m, piloted by a civilian contractor who seemed unaware that he was participating in a government cover-up. During the flight back to Fairbanks, I signed the non-disclosure agreement Collins had mentioned, legally binding myself to remain silent about my discoveries. But signing the paper didn't erase my memory, and it didn't eliminate the data I'd managed to keep hidden. I flew back to Seattle that afternoon and spent the next 2 weeks trying to return to normal life. I updated my resume, contacted potential clients, and attempted to focus on finding my next engineering contract. But I couldn't stop thinking about what lay buried beneath the Alaskan permafrost. Late one night, unable to sleep, I sat down with my laptop and started researching everything I could find about electromagnetic anomalies, underground structures, and the 1992 Chinese nuclear test that Agent Collins had mentioned. What I discovered changed everything. The Chinese test, conducted at the Lop Nua facility on May 21, 1992, was indeed one of the largest underground nuclear explosions ever detonated. The blast was so powerful that seismic monitoring stations around the world recorded the shockwaves as they travelled through the Earth's crust. But that wasn't the interesting part. I found archived scientific papers describing unusual electromagnetic phenomena that occurred globally in the days following the test. Radio disruptions, satellite communication failures, and compass anomalies were reported from locations thousands of miles away from the blast site. Most significantly, several research stations in Alaska reported sudden spikes in local electromagnetic activity, beginning approximately 6 hours after the Chinese detonation. Exactly the amount of time it would take seismic waves to travel through the Earth's crust from Lop Nua to Alaska. I cross-referenced these reports with geological surveys of the Alaskan region and found something that made my blood run cold. Every single electromagnetic anomaly had been reported from locations within a 50-mile radius of my survey site. Whatever was buried there had indeed been activated by the Chinese nuclear test, just as Collins had implied, but the implications went far beyond a simple cause and effect relationship. I started plotting the locations of other reported anomalies on a world map, looking for patterns. What I found was a global network of similar sites, places where electromagnetic activity had spiked following major seismic events, underground installations that seemed to respond to specific triggers. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that the Alaskan pyramid wasn't unique. It was part of a worldwide system of buried structures, all apparently designed to respond to geological disturbances, but designed by whom, and for what purpose? I thought back to the night I'd witnessed the energy pulse, remembering how the aurora borealis had formed geometric patterns directly above the burial site. Aurora phenomena are caused by charged particles from the sun interacting with Earth's magnetic field. If the underground structure could influence those interactions, it was essentially broadcasting energy into space. What if the buried pyramids weren't ancient monuments at all? What if they were communication devices, a global network designed to transmit signals to somewhere far beyond Earth? The possibility was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. If I was right, then humanity shared the planet with technology that predated our entire civilization by potentially millions of years. Technology that was still active, still responding to triggers, still sending messages to unknown recipients. I spent weeks researching similar sites around the world, building a database of locations where unusual electromagnetic phenomena had been reported following major seismic events. The pattern that emerged was undeniable, a global network of transmission stations, all apparently activated by disturbances in the Earth's crust. But before I could take my research any further, I received a letter that ended my investigation permanently. The letter arrived exactly 1 month after my return from Alaska. It was delivered by certified mail to my apartment address, though I hadn't given that information to anyone connected with the pipeline project. The return address showed only Department of Interior Special Projects Division, with a Washington, D.C. postal box number. Inside was a single page of official letterhead containing a brief message. Mr. Harrison, this communication serves as final notice regarding your terminated contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, project classification, Black Ice. Subsequent to your departure from the survey area, additional geological analysis has determined that the subsurface structure you detected is not archaeological in nature. The structure is an active installation of unknown origin that poses potential risks to national security. Any attempt to publicise information related to this discovery will result in immediate prosecution under the Espionage Act of 1917. Your signed non-disclosure agreement remains in full effect indefinitely. The installation you discovered is not a relic. It is a machine. Do not pursue further inquiry. Sincerely, Director, Special Projects Division. I read the letter 3 times before the full implication sank in. They weren't denying what I'd found. They were confirming it. The underground structure was artificial. It was active, and the government had known about it for over 30 years without understanding what it was or who had built it. But the most chilling aspect was the letter's final warning. It is a machine, not a monument, not an archaeological site, not a natural formation, a machine. I thought about the energy pulse I'd witnessed, the geometric patterns in the aurora, the electromagnetic signals that seemed to respond to seismic events around the world. If the buried pyramid was indeed a machine, then its purpose was clear. It was designed to detect and respond to geological disturbances by transmitting signals into space. The question remained, signals to whom? I locked the letter in a safety deposit box along with copies of all my survey data and research findings. If something happened to me, at least there would be evidence that the discovery had been made. But I never published my findings. I never contacted journalists or researchers or anyone else who might be interested in the truth about what lay beneath the Alaskan permafrost, because I realised that some knowledge carries a price too high to pay. If there really was a global network of alien communication devices buried beneath our feet, broadcasting our planet's geological status to unknown recipients in space, then humanity was living on borrowed time. We were tenants on a world that belonged to someone else, someone who had installed monitoring equipment long before our species existed. The machines weren't dormant relics of an ancient civilization. They were active components of a surveillance system that was still operational after millions of years. And every earthquake, every volcanic eruption, every nuclear test was sending updates to whoever had built them. I returned to my normal life as a civil engineer, taking contracts that kept me far from Alaska and far from any situation that might uncover similar installations. I told myself that ignorance was safer than knowledge, that some secrets were better left buried. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that machine humming beneath the permafrost. I wonder if it's still transmitting. I wonder who's listening, and I wonder what they plan to do when they decide we've learned too much about the world we think we own. For 6 months, I managed to convince myself that forgetting was possible. I took contracts in familiar territories, building inspections in suburban developments, soil analysis for shopping mall construction, routine work that involved nothing more mysterious than concrete and rebar. Then the dream started. At first they were just fragments, flashes of geometric light, the sound of deep humming that seemed to vibrate through my bones, the sensation of standing on solid ground while everything around me pulsed with invisible energy. I'd wake up with my heart racing and a metallic taste in my mouth as if I'd been breathing electrified air. But the dreams became more vivid as weeks passed. I began seeing the pyramid not from above, as I had during my survey, but from within. Vast chambers carved from black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Corridors that stretched beyond the reach of any illumination, filled with the constant sound of machinery that had been running for millennia. In these dreams, I wasn't alone. Shadowy figures moved through the passages, tall, elongated forms that seemed more like geometric projections than living beings. They moved with purpose, tending to controls and displays that covered the walls in intricate patterns of light and symbol. The most disturbing part was that they seemed aware of me. In the dreams, they would pause their activities and turn toward me with attention that felt like cold judgment. Without faces I could recognize, without voices I could understand, they somehow communicated a single clear message. I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. I consulted a sleep specialist, thinking the dreams were delayed stress responses from my time in Alaska. She prescribed medication that helped me fall asleep but didn't stop the visions. If anything, the drugs made them more intense, more real, more impossible to dismiss as products of an overwrought imagination. It was during one of these medicated dreams that I saw something new, a global map covered in points of light, each one marking a location where similar pyramids lay buried. The network stretched across every continent, even beneath the ocean floors, hundreds of installation sites, all connected by lines of energy that pulsed in synchronized patterns. I woke from that dream with absolute certainty that I was seeing something real. The buried machines weren't isolated installations. They were nodes in a planetary communication grid that spanned the entire world. 3 days later, I made a decision that changed everything. I started investigating again. Using the global locations from my dreams as starting points, I began researching electromagnetic anomalies and unexplained phenomena at similar sites around the world. What I found was a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidental. Every location where I'd dreamed of seeing a pyramid corresponded to a place where unusual events had been reported. The Nazca lines in Peru, built over an area where aircraft instruments malfunctioned regularly. The underwater structures near Bimini in the Bahamas, where submarines had reported mechanical failures and compass deviations. The Giza Plateau in Egypt, where modern surveys had detected massive voids beneath the known pyramids. Each site shared common characteristics: electromagnetic interference, geometric precision in ancient or unexplained structures, and a history of covering up or dismissing scientific findings that couldn't be easily explained. But the most significant pattern was temporal. Every site had experienced increased activity following major seismic events, exactly like the Alaskan installation after the 1992 Chinese nuclear test. I compiled a database of seismic events and electromagnetic anomalies dating back 50 years. The correlation was undeniable. Large earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and underground nuclear tests consistently triggered responses from specific locations around the globe. The buried machines weren't just monitoring geological activity, they were responding to it, broadcasting information about Earth's internal dynamics to receivers beyond our planet. I was building a case for the existence of a global alien surveillance network when I made a discovery that terrified me more than anything I'd found so far. The activity was increasing. According to my research, electromagnetic anomalies at these sites had been relatively stable for decades, showing only minor fluctuations in response to major geological events. But starting in 2020, the baseline activity levels had begun rising at all locations simultaneously. Something was changing. The network was becoming more active, more responsive, more awake. I plotted the activity increases on a timeline and noticed they correlated with something unexpected. The global increase in seismic activity over the past few years. More earthquakes, more volcanic eruptions, more geological instability than had been recorded in previous decades. What if the relationship wasn't cause and effect? What if the buried machines weren't just monitoring geological activity? What if they were causing it? The possibility was so disturbing I initially dismissed it as paranoid speculation. But the more I studied the data, the more compelling the evidence became. The timing was too precise, the correlations too consistent. If I was right, then humanity was living on a planet where alien technology was actively destabilizing the geological systems that supported all life on Earth. But why? What possible purpose could be served by triggering earthquakes and volcanic eruptions? The answer came to me during another dream, but this time I was prepared. I had set up a digital recorder beside my bed, hoping to capture any words or sounds I might make while experiencing the visions. What I heard when I played back the recording the next morning was my own voice, but speaking words I didn't remember saying. Stress testing, planetary stability assessment, structural analysis phase approaching completion. I'd somehow been speaking in the technical language of engineering, describing the geological chaos as if it were a planned evaluation of the planet's physical integrity. The machines weren't trying to destroy Earth, they were testing it. Over the following weeks, I dove deeper into geological data, looking for patterns that might support my terrifying hypothesis. What I found convinced me that the buried network was conducting a systematic analysis of Earth's structural stability. Seismic events weren't random, they were following a pattern. Stress points in tectonic plates were being tested in sequence, as if something was methodically evaluating how much pressure the planet's crust could withstand before catastrophic failure. The 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami, the 2010 Haiti earthquake, the increasing volcanic activity in Indonesia, Italy and Iceland, the unprecedented earthquake swarms in places like Oklahoma and Arkansas. All of these events clustered around locations where I'd identified buried installations. I created detailed models showing how the network might be triggering these events through focused electromagnetic pulses directed at specific geological fault lines. The technology required would be far beyond human capabilities, but for a civilization that could build planet-spanning monitoring networks, it would be routine engineering. But the most chilling aspect of my research was the timeline. If the current rate of geological testing continued, the network would have evaluated every major tectonic system on Earth within the next 5 to 10 years. What would happen when the testing phase was complete? I spent sleepless nights imagining scenarios, planetary mining operations that required clearing the surface of inconvenient biological life, terraforming projects that would remake Earth's atmosphere and geology, or simple property reclamation by the network's builders returning to a world they had left unattended for millennia. None of the possibilities included a future for human civilization. It was during this period of growing despair that I received an unexpected contact that changed everything once again. The email appeared in my inbox on a Tuesday morning with a subject line that made my blood freeze. Alaskan survey data, classification black ice. The sender's address was scrambled text that looked like a random string of characters, clearly routed through multiple encryption services to hide its origin. But the message content was brief and specific. Mr. Harrison, we know what you've discovered about the global network. Your research parallels investigations conducted by others who have encountered similar installations. A meeting has been arranged. Be at the Starbucks on Pine Street in downtown Seattle tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. Bring your data. You're not the only one who has seen the machines. The message included no signature, but attached to it was a single photograph that made my hands shake. An image of my own survey equipment at the Alaskan site, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been watching my investigation from a significant distance. Someone had been monitoring me during my time in Alaska, someone who wasn't part of Agent Collins' government team. I spent the entire night debating whether to attend the meeting. It could be a trap, government agents trying to identify how much I knew and what evidence I still possessed. Or it could be exactly what it claimed. Contact with others who had discovered the truth about the buried network. In the end, curiosity won over caution. I needed to know if I was really alone in this knowledge, or if there were others working to understand the threat humanity was facing. The Starbucks was crowded with the usual mix of students, business people and remote workers when I arrived at exactly 3 p.m. I ordered coffee and found a table near the back, trying to identify anyone who might be waiting for me. At 3:15, a woman in her 50s approached my table. She had greying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wore field clothing that suggested outdoor work, and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to physical challenges. "Mr. Harrison," she extended her hand. "I'm Catherine Webb. I think we need to talk." She sat down across from me and immediately began speaking in low, urgent tones. "I'm a marine archaeologist. 3 years ago, I was leading a deep-sea survey off the coast of Bermuda, when my team discovered an underwater structure that shouldn't exist. Geometric, massive, and actively generating electromagnetic fields that interfered with our equipment." She opened a tablet and showed me sonar images that looked remarkably similar to my ground-penetrating radar data from Alaska. A pyramid-shaped structure, perfectly symmetrical, sitting on the ocean floor at a depth of nearly a mile. When we tried to publish our findings, the research was classified and our funding was terminated. "Sound familiar?" I nodded, unable to speak. Catherine continued, "But I kept investigating privately. I found evidence of at least 12 similar installations in deep ocean locations around the world. All of them show the same characteristics: geometric precision, electromagnetic activity, and apparent activation following seismic events." She showed me more images. Underwater structures near Japan, the Mediterranean, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Each one was clearly artificial, clearly ancient, and clearly active. "There are others," she said. "A geologist in Australia who found similar structures in the outback. An archaeologist in Egypt who discovered chambers beneath the Sphinx that contain technology that shouldn't exist. A seismologist in Chile who documented electromagnetic pulses preceding earthquake activity. How many others? We've identified 17 researchers worldwide who have encountered installations or phenomena that appear to be part of the same network. Most have been silenced through official pressure, funding cuts, or career destruction. A few have simply disappeared. Catherine leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But some of us have continued working in secret. We've been sharing data, building a comprehensive picture of what we're dealing with. And what are we dealing with? A global surveillance and control system that's been operating for thousands of years, possibly millions. The installations aren't just monitoring Earth, they're managing it, controlling geological processes, atmospheric composition, even biological evolution through environmental manipulation. The implications hit me like a physical blow. We're not alone on this planet. We never have been. The question is whether humanity developed naturally, or whether we're the result of controlled biological development guided by whoever built the network. Catherine showed me more data, archaeological evidence of genetic bottlenecks in human evolution that corresponded to periods of unusual geological activity, atmospheric changes that seemed to follow patterns rather than random climate variation, even extinction events that appeared to have been artificially triggered. The network has been shaping Earth's development for millions of years, she said. Every mass extinction, every ice age, every major evolutionary leap has been guided by the installations. But why? What's the purpose? Catherine's expression was grim. We think Earth is being prepared for something. The stress testing you've documented, the increasing seismic activity, the atmospheric changes, it all points to final preparations for some kind of major transition. Transition to what? We don't know. But based on the escalating activity levels, we estimate it will begin within the next few years. She handed me a secure phone with an encrypted communication app. If you want to help us understand what we're facing, this will put you in contact with the others. We're working to decode transmissions from the installations to map the complete network, and to find some way to predict what's coming. What if we can't stop it? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then at least humanity will know the truth before the end. Over the following months, I became part of an underground network of researchers from around the world. Using encrypted communications and careful operational security, we shared data, theories, and discoveries about the installations that had consumed our professional lives. What emerged from our collective research was a picture of Earth that challenged everything humanity believed about our planet and our place in the universe. The installation network was vast. Over 300 confirmed sites across all continents and ocean floors. Each site contained structures of identical design but varying scale, all built from materials that didn't match any known geological formations. The construction showed evidence of technology far beyond human capabilities, with precision that exceeded our best modern engineering. But the most significant discovery came from Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a linguist and cryptographer in Japan who'd been analysing electromagnetic transmissions intercepted from the installations. The transmissions weren't random energy pulses, they were coded communications in a mathematical language that described Earth's physical and biological status in incredible detail. Real-time reports on atmospheric composition, geological stability, ocean chemistry, magnetic field fluctuations and biological diversity levels. More disturbing were the projections embedded in the transmissions, mathematical models showing how Earth systems would respond to various environmental stresses, including massive geological disruptions, atmospheric changes and population adjustments. The network was continuously updating these models based on data from the stress testing we documented. Each earthquake, each volcanic eruption, each environmental change provided new information that refined the projections, and all of the models pointed to the same conclusion: a massive intervention scheduled to begin when current biological systems reached predetermined stress thresholds. We were approaching those thresholds rapidly. Climate change, resource depletion, ecological collapse, and social instability were all being monitored by the network. But rather than random consequences of human activity, they appeared to be planned phases in a managed transition process. Humanity hadn't created the environmental crisis. We were living through the final stages of a controlled experiment that had been running for thousands of years. The realization was overwhelming. Every environmental disaster, every resource shortage, Every social conflict was part of a planned sequence designed to bring Earth's biological systems to a specific end state. But what would replace them? The answer came from an unexpected source: my dreams. As I became more deeply involved with the research network, my nighttime visions became more detailed and informative. I was seeing not just the installations, but the purpose they served. The geometric beings I encountered in the dreams weren't aliens. They were artificial intelligences, created by the network's builders to manage Earth's transition through automated systems. The real builders were gone, had been gone for millions of years, but they had left behind a planetary management system designed to prepare Earth for their eventual return. The stress testing, the environmental manipulation, the biological management. It was all preparation for recolonization by a species that had left Earth eons ago and was now ready to reclaim it. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that machine humming beneath the permafrost. I wonder if it's still transmitting. I wonder who's listening. And I wonder what they plan to do when they decide we've learned too much about the world we think we own. Because now I know the truth. We are temporary occupants of a world that has always belonged to someone else. The installations beneath our feet are counting down to a transition that will remake Earth according to specifications we cannot understand for purposes we cannot imagine. The truth is out there, buried beneath the ice in places like Alaska, waiting for the next contractor or surveyor or accidental discoverer to stumble across it. When that happens, and it will happen eventually, I hope they're wiser than I was. I hope they don't go back for one final look in the darkness, because some machines are better left undisturbed, and some signals are better left unsent. But the signals are being sent anyway, carrying reports of a planet ready for reclamation by its original inhabitants. The countdown has begun, and we are running out of time to understand what we're facing, or to find a way to survive what's coming. The Pressure Files. What really happened to the Ocean Gate submersible? Hey everyone! Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to ask you something that would really help the channel grow. If you're enjoying this documentary, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps us more than you possibly know, and allows us to keep bringing you these deep dive investigations. Also, if you're up for it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're listening from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is tuning in from, but only if you want to share. Now let's get into tonight's investigation. A massive thank you to Vortex and Scarlet Widow for submitting this idea. This is exactly the kind of story we live for here at Sleep Theories, where documented truth is stranger than fiction. On June 18th, 2023, 5 people descended toward the wreck of the Titanic in a submersible called Titan. None of them would return alive. The world was told it was a tragic accident, a catastrophic implosion caused by structural failure. But what if the official story is incomplete? What if there's evidence that something else happened down there in the crushing darkness, something that powerful institutions have worked very hard to keep quiet? Tonight we're going to examine the data they never released, the messages that disappeared, and the acoustic anomalies that don't match the narrative you've been told. This is the story of the pressure files, and what really happened to the Ocean Gate submersible. Part 1. The File That Started Everything, June 26th, 2023. 2 days after the Titan submersible was officially declared lost with all hands, a maritime analyst named Elias North received an email that would change everything. Elias wasn't a household name, but in the tight-knit world of deep-sea exploration and maritime safety analysis, he was respected. He'd spent 15 years working with various ocean research institutions, analysing dive data, and consulting on submersible safety protocols. The email came from an anonymous address, a randomly generated string of letters and numbers that would later prove impossible to trace. There was no message in the body of the email, just a single attachment. The file was named exactly this: Titan_logd_pressure_0519-0618.xlsx. Elias almost deleted it. Anonymous files from unknown sources were usually spam or worse, but something about the specificity of that file name made him pause. The dates caught his attention immediately. May 19th through June 18th. That ending date was the day Titan went down. He opened the file. What he found inside was extraordinary. Dozens upon dozens of entries, technical readings that appeared to be genuine Ocean Gate internal logs. Pressure readings, acoustic measurements, hull stress, calculations, things that should never have left the company's secure servers. Each entry was time-stamped, geo-tagged with coordinates, and included detailed technical annotations. Elias spent the first hour simply verifying what he could. The formatting matched Ocean Gate's known data structure. The technical terminology was correct. The coordinate readings aligned with known Titan dive locations from previous expeditions. Everything about the file screamed authenticity. But it was one specific entry that made his hands shake as he scrolled through the spreadsheet. June 18th, 0854, Coordinated Universal Time. Exactly the morning of the implosion, just minutes before Titan went silent. The entry read, Extremely Rapid Compression. Dash source, unknown. Dash external origin. External origin. Not a hull failure. Not an internal structural collapse. Something from outside the submersible. Elias read the line again. Then again. Then he started going through every other entry in the file, and what he discovered was even more disturbing. The pressure anomalies didn't start on June 18th. They went back weeks. There were irregular readings on multiple previous dives, entries that suggested Titan had been experiencing unexplained external pressure events long before its final journey. This contradicted everything the public had been told. The narrative was simple, almost reassuring in its clarity. Titan was an experimental submersible that had pushed its materials beyond safe limits. The hull failed. The occupants died instantly. Tragic, but explainable. A cautionary tale about innovation outpacing safety. But if this file was real, that story was incomplete at best, and deliberately misleading at worst. Elias saved 3 copies of the file to different secure locations, then began the most important investigation of his career. He had no idea that within weeks he would become one of the most sought after and simultaneously invisible figures in the deep-sea exploration community. And he definitely didn't know that powerful forces were already aware of what he'd received. Part 2. The Real Timeline. Before we go further into what Elias discovered, we need to establish the facts, the undisputed events that everyone agrees happened. Because the conspiracy here isn't about inventing fiction. It's about the spaces between the official facts, the gaps where uncomfortable questions live. Ocean Gate Expeditions was founded in 2009 by Stockton Rush and others. The company's mission was to make deep-sea exploration more accessible, to create submersibles that could take tourists and researchers to depths that had previously been accessible only to military or government-funded operations. It was an ambitious, even noble goal. The Titan itself was an unusual submersible. Unlike traditional designs that used heavy titanium spheres, Titan's passenger hull was made from carbon fibre and titanium. This made it lighter and theoretically capable of faster descents and ascents. But carbon fibre behaves differently under repeated pressure cycling than titanium. It doesn't fail gradually. When it fails catastrophically. Titan began making dives to the Titanic wreck site starting in 2021. The RMS Titanic rests at approximately 3,800 metres below the surface, about 2.5 miles down. At that depth, the pressure is roughly 375 times what we experience at sea level. Every square inch of surface area experiences thousands of pounds of force. The dive that ended in tragedy launched on June 18th, 2023. Aboard were 5 people: Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate and the pilot; Hamish Harding, a British businessman and adventurer; Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman Dawood, a Pakistani businessman and his 19-year-old son; and Paul-Henri Nargiolet, a French deep-sea explorer who had visited the Titanic wreck more than 30 times. Titan lost contact with its support ship, the Polar Prince, 1 hour and 45 minutes into its descent. The last communication was a routine status message, then nothing. What followed was a massive search and rescue operation. Ships and aircraft from multiple nations converged on the area. The world watched and hoped. For days there was the possibility, however slim, that Titan was intact somewhere on the ocean floor, its occupants alive but unable to communicate. On June 22nd, debris was found near the Titanic wreck site. The pattern of the debris made it clear what had happened. Catastrophic implosion. The pressure hull had failed, and the implosion would have been instantaneous. The occupants would not have suffered. They would have died faster than their nervous systems could even register pain. Then came the detail that made Elias's anonymous file so significant. On June 28th, the United States Navy confirmed something remarkable. Their underwater acoustic monitoring system had detected what they called anomalous acoustic signatures at the time Titan went silent. In other words, the Navy had heard the implosion happen in real time. They'd known for days that Titan was lost, but they hadn't said anything publicly, supposedly to avoid compromising classified monitoring capabilities. That acoustic signature would become crucial to Elias's investigation. Part 3. The logs don't lie. Elias spent the next week doing something unusual for someone who received an anonymous leak. He tried to disprove it. He looked for any evidence that the file was fabricated, that someone had created an elaborate hoax. He contacted former OceanGate contractors through carefully worded inquiries that didn't reveal what he had. He cross-referenced the technical data with publicly available information about Titan specifications. Everything checked out. More disturbing, some of the technical details in the file matched, things that had never been made public. Specific serial numbers for sensors, internal code designations for monitoring systems, the kind of information that only someone with direct access to OceanGate systems would know. The pressure anomalies painted a disturbing picture. The file showed that Titan had experienced unexplained external pressure events on at least 6 separate occasions over the 3 weeks leading up to the final dive. These weren't the normal, gradual pressure increases you'd expect during descent. These were sudden spikes, moments where the external pressure on the hull increased dramatically for a few seconds, then returned to expected levels. On June 3rd, during a dive that had been publicly reported as successful, the log showed a pressure spike at 2,000 metres depth. The annotation read, "External percussion event dash source unidentified dash no damage observed." On June 9th, another spike, this time at 3,000 metres. Hull stress monitors registered readings that should have caused alarms, but apparently didn't. On June 14th, 4 days before the final dive, the most significant pre-disaster event occurred. At 3,500 metres, Titan experienced what the log described as lateral compression. Not pressure from above, which would be normal, not pressure equally distributed, which the hull was designed for. Pressure from the side, as if something had struck or pressed against the hull. The annotation on that entry was chilling. Microfracture, detected in aft hull segment dash, dive aborted dash returned to surface for inspection. Dash fracture could not be visually confirmed. Dash dive cleared for continuation. They knew something was wrong. They detected damage, but they couldn't see it, so they continued operations. Elias began reaching out to people who might be able to help him understand what he was seeing. He contacted metallurgists, pressure system experts, and acoustic engineers. He framed his questions carefully, presenting the data as hypothetical scenarios. What could cause sudden external pressure spikes at depth? What could create lateral compression on a submersible hull? The answers he got were troubling. Multiple experts told him the same thing. In the open ocean, at those depths, there's nothing that should create those kinds of pressure anomalies. The pressure at depth is immense, but it's also constant and predictable. It doesn't spike. It doesn't come from unexpected angles, unless something else is down there. A large object moving past the submersible? Possibly, if it were large enough and moving fast enough. But what moves at that speed at nearly 4,000 meters depth? A sudden current? Unlikely to create the patterns he was seeing. An underwater landslide or methane bubble release? The geology of the Titanic wreck site didn't support that explanation. That left options that no one wanted to say out loud. An undisclosed military vessel, an unknown geological phenomenon, or something else entirely. Part 4. The messages they didn't release public reporting established that Titan communicated with its surface support ship through text messages. This wasn't unusual for submersibles. Voice communication at those depths is difficult and often unreliable. Text messages sent through acoustic modems are more dependable. What the public was told was that Titan's last message was routine, a status update, everything normal. Then silence. But Elias's file contained something else, references to messages that never appeared in any official timeline. 6 messages that, according to the logs, were sent from Titan on June 18th. Between 0830 and 0852, Coordinated Universal Time. The final message was logged as sent at 0853, just 1 minute before the pressure anomaly that appears to have preceded the implosion. The file didn't contain the full text of these messages. Instead, it had brief descriptions, possibly notes made by whoever was monitoring the communication. Elias spent days trying to track down anyone who might have access to the actual message logs. What he pieced together was fragmentary, but deeply unsettling. 0832. Message references visual distortion outside viewport. Description includes the phrase shimmering distortions and request for confirmation of expected visual phenomena at depth. 0837. Message mentions acoustic anomalies, described as metallic impacts not originating from hull stress or normal operational sounds. 0841. Request for sonar scan of surrounding area. Specific mention of possible object below current position. 0845. Query about whether another submersible is operating in the area. 0850. Request for immediate surface contact with Expedition Coordinator Nargiolet's previous dive data from the same location. 0853. Partial message, not fully transmitted. Begins with phrase, is there another, then nothing. At 0854, the extreme pressure anomaly. By 0856, Titan had ceased all communication and, according to Navy acoustic data, had imploded. What's extraordinary about these messages isn't just their content, it's that they were never mentioned in any official investigation summary, any press briefing, or any public statement. If they existed, they were deleted or suppressed. If they didn't exist, then why were they referenced in logs that otherwise proved to be completely accurate? Elias tried to approach this logically. Maybe the messages were routine and just not deemed relevant. Maybe they were communication tests. Maybe there was a mundane explanation. But he kept coming back to that June 18th entry at 0845. Query about whether another submersible is operating in the area. Why would Titan ask that question? What did they see or detect that made them think there was another vessel nearby? Part 5. The sounds. Nobody explained. The search for Titan captured global attention for days. Ships and aircraft searched the surface. Remotely operated vehicles searched the depths, and the whole time, acoustic monitoring equipment listened for any sign of the missing submersible. On June 20th, 2 days after Titan went missing, a Canadian P-3 Poseidon aircraft dropped sonobuoys into the search area. These devices float on the surface and extend hydrophones deep into the water to listen for sounds. Multiple sonobuoys detected what search coordinators described as banging noises at 30-minute intervals. This gave hope. Banging noises meant someone alive, trying to signal their location. The search intensified around the areas where the sounds were detected, but later analysis complicated the story. The banging sounds, it turned out, could have been anything. Underwater sounds travel in strange ways, reflecting and refracting, sometimes appearing to come from locations far from their actual source. Marine life, shifting metal on the ocean floor, even the search ships themselves could have created the sounds. The official position eventually became that the sounds were probably not related to Titan at all. Just acoustic artifacts of a noisy ocean environment. Elias's investigation revealed a different story. Through contacts he'd developed in the acoustic analysis community, Elias obtained copies of the actual sonobuoy recordings. Not the official summaries, not the press briefing descriptions, but the raw audio files and their technical analysis. What he found was extraordinary. The sounds detected on June 20th were not random. They occurred in patterns, every 30 minutes as reported. But the pattern was too regular, too mechanical. Human banging, even desperate human banging, would have variations in timing, in intensity, in rhythm. These sounds had none of that. They were metronomic, precise. More significant spectral analysis of the sounds showed frequency components that didn't match impacts on titanium or carbon fibre. The sounds had characteristics more consistent with sonar pings, specifically active sonar reflecting off a hard surface. In other words, something was down there using sonar, and whatever it wasn't Titan. Elias consulted with a retired naval acoustic technician named Marcus Webb, a man who'd spent 25 years listening to submarine sounds for the United States Navy. Webb lived in a small coastal town in Maine, and he agreed to meet Elias only after extensive vetting and assurances of anonymity. Webb analysed the recordings Elias had obtained. His conclusion was unequivocal. "This is active sonar," Webb told him. "Low frequency, high power, the kind of signature you get from a large object probably moving. And here's the thing that should concern you. I've heard a lot of sonar in my career. Russian submarines, Chinese submarines, our own boats, research vessels, you name it. This doesn't match anything in my reference library. The pulse structure is wrong. The frequency modulation is wrong. It's like someone built a sonar system that works on principles just slightly different from everyone else's." Elias asked the obvious question. Could it be classified military technology? Something we don't know about? Webb shrugged. Could be, but we're talking about the Titanic wreck site. That location isn't strategically important. There's no reason for any military to be operating experimental sonar systems there, unless they were looking for something specific. Like what? That's the question you should be asking. What's down there worth looking for? Part 6. The Navy's incomplete story. The United States Navy's acoustic monitoring system is called IUSS, the Integrated Underwater Surveillance System. It's a network of hydrophones scattered across the ocean floor, originally designed during the Cold War to track Soviet submarines. The system is so sensitive it can detect ships and submarines thousands of miles away. When the Navy announced on June 28th that they'd detected acoustic signatures consistent with Titan's implosion, it seemed like closure. They'd heard it happen. They could pinpoint when it occurred. The mystery of timing was solved. But Elias noticed something in the Navy's statement that bothered him. They said they detected signatures, plural, not signature, and they described them as anomalous, not standard, not typical, not matching known implosion patterns. anomalous. Through careful networking and more than one questionable information exchange, Elias obtained a document that would crack open the entire investigation. It was marked NAVCA, the Naval Sea Systems Command, with a classification header that had been partially redacted. The document was titled Atlantic Command Acoustic Analysis Event 0623 Echo. June 23rd was when debris from Titan was officially found. Echo was presumably just a designation code, but the contents of the document were extraordinary. The Navy had indeed detected Titan's implosion, but their analysis showed something nobody had made public. There were two distinct acoustic events, separated by 0.8 seconds. Less than a second, but clearly distinguishable in the high-fidelity recordings the IUSS system captured. The first event matched the expected signature of a pressure hull failure at depth. A sharp, powerful acoustic pulse, the sound of air-filled space suddenly collapsing under immense pressure. That was Titan imploding. But the second event, 0.8 seconds later, was different. The acoustic signature showed a different frequency profile, a different duration, and a different apparent point of origin. It was close to Titan, very close, but not the same location. The report's conclusion, partially redacted, suggested two possibilities. Either Titan imploded in stages, with different sections of the hull failing in rapid succession, or something else collapsed or impacted the ocean floor at nearly the same moment. The report recommended further analysis. That's where the document ended. Elias found no evidence that further analysis was ever conducted, or if it was buried deeper than he could dig. But the implications were staggering. If something else created an acoustic signature at the moment Titan imploded, what was it? And was it cause or coincidence? Part 7. The Warning They Ignored. As Elias dug deeper into OceanGate's history, he discovered that the problems with Titan went back much further than anyone publicly acknowledged. In 2019, 4 years before the disaster, Titan underwent a test dive that was aborted under concerning circumstances. The publicly available information about this dive was minimal. A test was conducted, some data was gathered, the dive ended early, end of story. But Elias found references to an internal report from that dive buried in technical forums where former OceanGate contractors sometimes posted anonymously. The 2019 test dive reached a depth of approximately 3,500 metres, just slightly shallower than the Titanic wreck site. During the dive, Titan's monitoring systems detected what the report called unexplained acoustic spikes. The hull stress sensors showed pressure distortions that didn't match modelled expectations, and most concerning, there was a notation about unknown external contact. Something touched the submersible, or got very close to it, at 3,500 metres depth in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The dive was aborted immediately. Titan returned to the surface. Engineers examined every inch of the hull and found nothing wrong. No damage, no stress marks, no evidence of contact with anything. So they did what organisations often do when faced with an anomaly that can't be explained or repeated. They noted it in their records, decided it must have been a sensor glitch or a data interpretation error and moved on. But now Elias thought, what if it wasn't a glitch? What if in 2019 Titan encountered the same thing it would encounter fatally in 2023? And what if the difference was that in 2019 they turned back? He tried to find the engineers who worked on that 2019 analysis. 2 of them no longer worked in the maritime industry. One had moved to aerospace, another was working in renewable energy. When Elias contacted them through carefully worded LinkedIn messages, both declined to discuss their time at OceanGate, citing non-disclosure agreements. But one engineer, who requested absolute anonymity, sent Elias a brief message. We found microscopic stress patterns in the hull after that dive that shouldn't have been there. Not from internal pressure, from external. Like something pressed against the hull with immense force, but only for a fraction of a second. Not long enough to cause failure, but long enough to leave a signature in the material structure. We were told to note it and move on. I think about that a lot now. Part 8. The Corridor. everyone monitors. Marcus Webb, the retired Navy acoustic technician, told Elias something during their meeting that opened an entirely new line of investigation. "You need to understand something about that area of the Atlantic," Webb said. "The region around the Titanic wreck is one of the most acoustically monitored sections of ocean in the world." Elias was surprised. "Why? It's not near any major shipping lanes. It's not strategically important." Webb smiled grimly. "That's what makes it perfect. It's quiet. Background noise is minimal. Sound propagates clearly through the water column. During the Cold War, both we and the Soviets used that area as a reference point for calibrating acoustic systems. We knew the baseline acoustic signature of that region better than almost anywhere else in the ocean. So when something moves through there, when something creates sound, we notice." So the Navy would have known if there were any submarines in the area when Titan went down. Absolutely. They would have known about any vessel, any significant biological activity, any geological events. That corridor is transparent to acoustic monitoring. Nothing moves down there without someone hearing it. "Then why," Elias asked, "did the public receive so little information about what was detected?" Webb's expression darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? Either they detected nothing unusual, which seems unlikely given the anomalous signatures they admitted to, or they detected something they don't want to discuss." Elias spent the next several days researching the acoustic history of the Titanic wreck region. What he found was fascinating and disturbing. Since the 1980s, when the wreck was first discovered, there had been sporadic reports of unusual acoustic phenomena in the area. Nothing that made headlines, just footnotes in oceanographic research papers, metallic echoes that didn't correspond to the wreck itself, high-strength reflective signatures suggesting large metal objects in areas where no objects were charted, and occasional reports of objects moving faster than known submersibles or marine life could move at those depths. Every time these anomalies were detected, they were attributed to equipment malfunction, acoustic reflections from the wreck creating false images, or misidentification of known phenomena, standard scientific explanations for non-standard observations. But taken together, over decades, they painted a picture of a region where strange things happened with just enough regularity to be notable, but not enough to trigger serious investigation. Until now. Until Titan. Part 9. Nargeolet's Secret Map. Paul-Henri Nargeolet was 77 years old when he died aboard Titan. He'd spent decades exploring the Titanic wreck, earning the nickname Mr. Titanic. He knew that wreck site better than perhaps anyone alive. He'd documented it, studied it, and helped recover thousands of artifacts from the debris field. After the disaster, Nargeolet's contributions to Titanic research were widely celebrated. But Elias became interested in something else, what Nargeolet had been researching in the years before his death. Through contacts in the maritime archaeology community, Elias learned that Nargeolet had been working on a comprehensive sonar mapping project of the area surrounding the Titanic wreck. Not just the wreck itself, but the ocean floor for several kilometres in every direction. This wasn't public work, it was personal research, conducted during his many dives to the site. Nargeolet had apparently become fascinated by geological formations in the region, particularly to the east of the wreck. Elias managed to speak with a French oceanographer who had collaborated with Nargeolet on some projects. The oceanographer, who spoke on condition of anonymity, told Elias something remarkable. Paul found something unusual about 2 kilometres east of the Titanic, the oceanographer said. He showed me sonar images from one of his dives in 2021. There was a structure on the ocean floor that didn't match the surrounding geology. Very straight edges, almost geometric. Paul was fascinated by it. He called it Site Z. Just a designation he made up. He wanted to do a proper survey of it, but there was never time during the official Titanic dives. What did he think it was? Elias asked. He didn't speculate much. Paul was very careful about that. But he said the formation had anomalous geometry. That was his phrase. He thought it might be an unusual geological feature, possibly a rock formation shaped by ancient currents. But he also said the angles were too precise for natural formation. He wanted to investigate further. Elias felt a chill. Do you know if the Titan dive on June 18th was planning to visit Site Z? The oceanographer paused. "I don't know for certain, but Paul mentioned to me in May that he was hoping to finally get a close look at the structure. He said this might be his last season diving at those depths, and he wanted to see it before he stopped." Elias tried to obtain Nargeole's sonar maps. He contacted archives, research institutions, and personal associates. What he discovered was frustrating. Nargeole's personal research materials had been collected by his family and were not available for review. Requests through official channels were politely declined. But Elias did find something, a presentation Nargeole had given at a small maritime conference in 2022. The presentation was about advanced sonar techniques for wreck site mapping. Most of it was technical, but there was one slide near the end that caught Elias's attention. It showed a sonar image, high resolution, of the ocean floor. In the centre of the image was a formation that looked nothing like the surrounding sediment and rock. It was angular, with straight edges and what appeared to be right-angle corners. The slide had minimal text, just a location designation. 41 degrees, 43 minutes north, 49 degrees, 56 minutes west. Elias checked those coordinates, approximately 1,600 metres east of the Titanic wreck. Site Z. Part 10, the deviation. Nobody mentioned. Titan's descent on June 18th should have been routine. Straight down to the Titanic wreck site, perhaps a slight adjustment for currents, but essentially a vertical descent to a precise location. Using publicly available data about the last known position of Titan's support ship and the known location of the Titanic wreck, Elias began reconstructing the submersible's dive path. He factored in typical current patterns for that region and time of year, the known drift rate of objects descending at the speed Titan would have been travelling, and the established protocols OceanGate used for approaching the wreck site. What he found was subtle but significant. Based on the timing of Titan's last communication and the location where debris was eventually found, the submersible appeared to have deviated from the standard approach path. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The deviation was to the east, towards Site Z. Elias couldn't prove that Titan intentionally headed toward the anomalous formation Nargeole had been studying. The deviation could have been caused by currents, by a navigation adjustment, by any number of mundane factors. But the direction and magnitude of the deviation were consistent with a course change designed to bring Titan within visual range of coordinates, located 1,600 metres east of the Titanic. More significant, this deviation was not mentioned in any official briefing or investigation summary that Elias could find. The public narrative was that Titan was descending directly to the Titanic when it imploded, but the debris field location suggested otherwise. Why wasn't this mentioned? It could be simple oversight. In the chaos of the investigation and the tragedy of the loss, a minor course deviation might not have seemed important. But to Elias, it suggested something else. If Titan was approaching Site Z, and if that's where something went wrong, then acknowledging the deviation would raise questions about what they were doing there and what they might have found. Part 11. The structure beneath the wreck. Elias needed better data about what was actually on the ocean floor at Site Z. Sonar images from Nargeole's presentation were provocative, but not conclusive. He needed to know if other researchers had detected the same anomaly. This led him to the archives of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, one of the premier deep ocean research organisations in the world. Woods Hole had been involved in finding the Titanic wreck in 1985 and had conducted numerous surveys of the area in subsequent years. Elias submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for historical sonar data from the Titanic wreck region. Months passed with no response. He followed up repeatedly. Finally, he received a package containing digital files of sonar surveys conducted in the late 1990s. What he found in those surveys was extraordinary. A 1998 comprehensive mapping project had documented a large, unusual formation, approximately 2 kilometres east-northeast of the Titanic wreck. The formation was described in technical notes as an unidentified seafloor feature, designated Feature 17B. The sonar images showed a structure with distinctly geometric characteristics. It appeared triangular in plan view, with edges that were remarkably straight given the chaotic nature of natural ocean floor formations. The formation was large, roughly 100 metres along its longest axis, and appeared to rise several metres above the surrounding sediment. Most intriguingly, the feature showed uniform acoustic reflectivity, suggesting it was composed of consistent material throughout, unlike the mixed sediment, rock, and debris typical of the ocean floor in that region. The survey report noted that Feature 17b represented an interesting geological phenomenon and recommended further investigation. As far as Elias could determine, no further investigation was ever conducted, or if it was, the results were not publicly available. Elias consulted with a geological oceanographer about the formation. He sent the sonar images without context, simply asking for an interpretation. The oceanographer's response was cautious, but intrigued. "This is unusual. The geometry is very regular, more regular than I'd expect from natural processes. It could be a rock formation that's been shaped by currents over millennia, but those edges are remarkably straight. It could be a type of sediment deposit with unusual consolidation properties, or it could be something else entirely. I'd need much higher resolution imaging and possibly core samples to say definitively. Where is this located?" When Elias told him, the oceanographer went silent for a moment, then said, "That's near the Titanic. Has anyone investigated this recently?" "Not that I can find." "That's surprising. You'd think with all the traffic to that wreck site, someone would have taken a closer look at anything unusual in the area. Unless," Elias thought, "someone had taken a closer look and didn't like what they found." Part 12, The Last Image. Elias's investigation had assembled a circumstantial case that something unusual existed at Site Zed, that Titan may have approached it, and that the submersible experienced external pressure events consistent with encountering something unexpected. But he had no direct evidence of what the Titan crew actually saw. Then he received a second anonymous message. This one came through an encrypted communication service, far more sophisticated than the original email. The message was brief. "Check the recovered control systems. File path recovered fragments / viewport camera / cache June 18. Titan's debris had been recovered and was under the custody of the National Transportation Safety Board. Some of that debris included electronic components from the submersible's control systems. Officially, no usable data had been recovered. The violence of the implosion and the subsequent time in saltwater had destroyed storage media and corrupted any data that might have survived." But Elias's anonymous source was suggesting otherwise. He spent weeks trying to figure out how to access or even verify the existence of recovered data files. He contacted people involved in the debris recovery, people involved in the investigation, and people who worked in data forensics. Nobody would acknowledge that recoverable data existed. Then, 3 months after the disaster, a small article appeared in a technical journal about advances in recovering data from damaged storage media, specifically mentioning work being done on the Titan investigation. The article was quickly retracted, with a note that it contained premature information, but Elias had saved a copy. The article mentioned that forensic specialists had successfully extracted partial files from a damaged solid-state drive recovered from Titan's control tablet. Most of the data was corrupted, but some image files had been partially reconstructed. Elias pulled every string he had, called in every favour, and eventually, through a chain of contacts that he would never fully reveal, obtained a file. A single image file, low resolution, partially corrupted, with large sections of missing data. But what remained was extraordinary. The image showed the view from Titan's viewport. The timestamp embedded in the file metadata read June 18th, 2023, 0853 Coordinated Universal Time. 2 minutes before the pressure anomaly, 1 minute before Titan's last partial message. The image was dark, as would be expected at that depth, with only Titan's external lights for illumination. But in the illuminated area there was something that didn't look like ocean floor, didn't look like the Titanic wreck, didn't look like anything Elias had ever seen in deep ocean photography. There was a surface, smooth, reflective, catching the light from Titan's floods. The reflectivity suggested metal, though it was impossible to be certain. And there was an edge, a sharp right angle where this surface met another surface perpendicular to it. The image was too corrupted to show more. Large sections of pixels were simply black, missing data. But in the remaining fragments, Elias could make out what appeared to be a corridor or opening, shadows suggesting depth beyond the visible surface, straight lines that spoke of artificial construction, not natural formation. It was only one image. It could have been an artifact of the corruption, pixels randomly aligning to create the illusion of structure. It could have been a reflection or an optical effect Elias wasn't understanding correctly. But it could also have been exactly what it appeared to be, a photograph of something artificial at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Part 13. The Contact. Elias knew he was onto something significant. He'd been careful, using encryption, compartmentalizing his sources, not publishing anything publicly, but someone was paying attention. His phone rang one evening in late September, 3 months after the disaster. The number was blocked. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. North? A voice, male, professional, unaccented. Who is this? That's not important. What's important is that you stop investigating the structure. Elias felt his pulse quicken. What structure? You know what structure. The formation near the Titanic wreck. The deviation in Titan's descent path. The thing you've been building a case around. Stop. Why? Because it has nothing to do with the vessel failure. Titan failed because of structural inadequacies in its pressure hull. That's been established. Anything else you're pursuing is a distraction. Who are you? Elias asked again. Someone who's trying to help you avoid making a significant mistake. You're a respected analyst. You have a good reputation. Publishing conspiracy theories about secret structures on the ocean floor will destroy that reputation, and it won't accomplish anything. Are you saying there's no structure? A pause. I'm saying that what is or isn't on the ocean floor at that location is irrelevant to the Titan investigation. Then it shouldn't matter if I keep looking. Mr. North, please understand this carefully. There are things in the ocean that are best left undisturbed. The Titan tragedy was about engineering failure and poor decision-making. Making it about anything else serves no one. Walk away from this. And if I don't, the voice remained calm, then you'll find that your sources dry up, your reputation suffers, and your investigation leads nowhere. We're not threatening you, we're advising you, for your own benefit. The call ended. Elias sat in his apartment staring at his phone. The call had confirmed everything. There was something at Site Z. Titan had approached it, and someone with significant resources wanted the whole thing buried alongside the submersible. He immediately began backing up all his files to multiple secure locations. He documented the phone call. He prepared a summary of everything he'd found just in case. 3 days later, he woke up to find his computer's hard drive corrupted. All his local files were gone. His cloud storage accounts had been accessed and wiped. The backup drives he kept in a locked drawer had been remotely formatted. Everything was gone. Everything except the copies he'd hidden in places that weren't connected to any network. The files he'd stored on old USB drives and kept in a safe deposit box. The printed documents he'd mailed to himself and left unopened. Whoever had warned him had followed through. They demonstrated their capability, but they hadn't been quite thorough enough. Part 14. The Final Clue. Elias was scared, but also energized. The deletion of his files proved he was onto something real. You don't suppress information unless that information matters. He spent weeks being paranoid, checking for surveillance, varying his routines, communicating only through encrypted channels. He started rebuilding his research from the hidden backups, but he did it carefully, offline, with no digital footprint. Then, in mid-October, he received one more anonymous communication. This time it was a physical letter, delivered to a P.O. box he maintained under a different name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration header. The message was brief. The ocean floor holds things older than the wreck. They didn't want tourists finding out. Attached to the paper was a photograph, high resolution, professional quality, clearly taken by a remotely operated vehicle or submersible equipped with proper lighting. The image showed a section of ocean floor, sediment and rock, and embedded in that rock was a panel. Metal, clearly artificial, roughly 2 meters square. The panel showed signs of corrosion but was still intact, and on the panel's surface, just barely visible under the marine growth, was an edge, a right angle identical to what Elias had seen in the corrupted image from Titan. The photograph had no location data, no timestamp, no context, just the image and that single sentence message. Elias studied the photograph for hours. The metal was definitely artificial. The right angle was too precise to be natural, and the way it was embedded in the rock suggested it had been there for a very long time, not decades, possibly centuries. The surrounding geology showed no signs of recent disturbance. Whatever this was, it had been on the ocean floor near the Titanic wreck for a long time, long enough for rock to partially cover it, long enough for marine growth to obscure its features, but not long enough to be eroded away or consumed by corrosion. Elias considered what he knew. There was an anomalous formation at Site Z. That formation had geometric features inconsistent with natural geology. Nargilé had known about it and wanted to investigate it. Titan had deviated toward it during its final dive. The submersible had experienced external pressure anomalies. The crew had sent messages suggesting they saw something unexpected, and then Titan had imploded, possibly coincidentally, possibly not. And now someone had sent him proof that there was indeed something artificial at that location, something old, something someone very much wanted to keep secret. Part 15. The upload. Elias knew he had to release what he'd found. Keeping it to himself served no purpose, and if something happened to him, the information would be lost. But releasing it through traditional channels would get it suppressed immediately. Academic journals would reject it. Maritime organisations would discredit it. The story would be killed before it ever reached the public. So he did what whistleblowers in the digital age do. He prepared a comprehensive report, including all his evidence, all his sources, all his analysis. He encrypted it and uploaded it to multiple secure platforms. He sent links to journalists, researchers and activists he trusted. He posted it on forums dedicated to deep-sea mysteries and maritime anomalies. The last line of his report read, "The Titan didn't fail because of bad engineering alone. It failed because it got too close to something it wasn't supposed to find. Something that's been hidden at the bottom of the Atlantic for longer than anyone wants to admit. Something that raises questions our institutions aren't prepared to answer." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the report was being shared across the internet. News outlets picked up the story. Other researchers came forward with their own anomalous findings from the Titanic wreck region. The conspiracy gained momentum, and then, 24 hours after Elias posted his report, every link went dead. Every copy of the file showed as corrupted or deleted. The forums where he'd posted were suddenly offline for maintenance. Journalists who'd contacted him stopped responding. The story disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared, scrubbed from the internet by forces with resources Elias couldn't match. He tried to repost. He created new accounts, used different platforms, sent out new copies of the file, but each time, within hours, everything was deleted. Someone was monitoring the entire internet for any mention of his research and removing it faster than he could spread it. 1 week after his initial upload, Elias received a final message. It came through an encrypted channel he'd thought was secure. Just 3 words: "Stop now, please." Elias made one last attempt. He contacted a documentary filmmaker he knew, someone with a reputation for investigating controversial topics. They agreed to meet in person. No electronic communication, no paper trail. The meeting never happened. Elias didn't show up. Calls to his phone went to voicemail. His apartment was found empty, with no signs of struggle, no indication of where he'd gone. Elias North hasn't been heard from since November 2023. His family filed a missing person report. Police investigated and found no evidence of foul play. His bank accounts haven't been accessed. His phone hasn't been used. He simply vanished. Some say he went into hiding. Some say he was silenced. Some say he never existed at all. That the whole investigation was an elaborate internet hoax. But copies of his report still circulate in the darkest corners of the internet, on encrypted networks, in private forums where people trade information too dangerous to share openly. And people who've read it, people who understand what it implies, look at maps of the Atlantic Ocean a little differently now. Because somewhere 2.5 miles beneath the surface near the wreck of the Titanic, there is something that shouldn't be there. Something old. Something hidden. Something that 5 people got too close to on June 18th, 2023. And the official story, the one about engineering failure and poor decision making, is true as far as it goes. It just doesn't go far enough. Epilogue. Questions without answers. The OceanGate Titan disaster killed 5 people and ended a company. Investigations determined that the submersible's carbon fibre hull was inadequate for repeated deep dives, that safety protocols were insufficient, that warnings were ignored. All of that is true and documented. But the questions Elias North raised remain unanswered. Why were pressure anomalies detected weeks before the final dive? Why were text messages referencing visual and acoustic anomalies never released? Why did acoustic monitoring detect 2 distinct events during the implosion? What is the geometric formation at Site Z? Why did Titan appear to deviate toward that location? What did the partially recovered image actually show? These questions make people uncomfortable, because they suggest the disaster wasn't just about corporate recklessness and engineering failure. They suggest there was something else involved, something that doesn't fit the narrative we've been told, and maybe that's the point. Maybe some truths are too complicated, too disruptive, too unsettling to acknowledge. Maybe it's easier to accept a story about human error than to confront the possibility that there are things in our ocean we don't understand, things we've been carefully avoiding for reasons we're not privy to. The ocean covers 70% of our planet. We've explored perhaps 5% of it in any meaningful detail. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deepest parts of our own ocean. And in those unexplored depths, in the crushing pressure and absolute darkness, there might be things that have been there longer than human civilization. Things that weren't meant to be found. Things that powerful institutions have known about and decided to keep secret. The Titan is gone. The 5 people aboard are gone. Elias North is gone. But the questions remain, floating in the dark water, waiting for the next person brave or foolish enough to ask them. And somewhere, 2.5 miles down, Site Z is still there, still geometric, still anomalous, still waiting. That's the story of the pressure. Files, the investigation that disappeared, and the questions nobody wants answered. Make of it what you will. Draw your own conclusions, but the next time you hear about deep-sea exploration, about submersibles diving to historic wrecks, about the mysteries of the ocean floor, remember that there are some places where, maybe, just maybe, we're not supposed to go. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this documentary, please use your hype points on the video. It genuinely helps us more than you can imagine. And let us know in the comments what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. We love connecting with all of you around the world. Until next time, this is Sleep Theories, where the truth is always deeper than it seems.